headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. I am Estefanía Bravo, and this is From the South. We begin with breaking news from Peru. Keiko Fujimori, the leader of the opposition and daughter of Alberto Fujimori, has been arrested. The leader of Fuerza Popular, the biggest party in Congress, was detained when she went to the prosecutor's office. She'd gone to declare on alleged illegal contributions to her campaign. The judge has reportedly ordered that she be detained for 10 days. The prosecutors also ordered the detention of 19 others involved in the case, including 2 former ministers. And further afield in the United States, Category 4 Hurricane Michael is dangerously gaining strength as it approaches Florida's Gulf Coast. It's just hours away from making landfall with winds of 230 kilometers per hour. Over 2 million residents in 20 Florida counties were giving mandatory or voluntary evacuation orders. But in the last hours, the governor of Florida, Rick Scott, told them it is now too late to evacuate and they should stay put. Let's listen to what the authorities have been saying.
Hurricane Michael is a deadly Category 4 storm. This is the worst storm that the Florida Panhandle has seen in more than 100 years. Again, this is the worst storm that our Florida Panhandle has seen in a century. Hurricane Michael is upon us, and now is the time to seek refuge.
Unfortunately, Hurricane Michael is a hurricane of the worst kind. There's nothing else that can be said about it. We're looking at 145 mile an hour sustained winds. It could possibly get stronger. Major hurricanes cause large losses of life and the most amount of destruction that hurricanes can bring forward.
Residents in Northwest Florida have been getting ready to face the storm. The hurricane will bring flash flooding, life-threatening storms, surges up to 4 meters high, and devastating winds, making officials and residents extremely nervous. Almost all shops on the beachfront have been boarded up and closed. And more than a third of U.S. oil production in the Gulf of Mexico has been shut down as a precaution as Hurricane Michael passes. Companies stopped producing 700,000 barrels of oil a day. That represents about 9% of total U.S. production. Our correspondent in the United States, Jorge Gestoso, brings us more.
Thank you. Hurricane Michael, a Category 4 monstrous storm with winds of 145 miles, could reach Category 5 before hitting Panama City in the few coming hours. We're talking about a surge expected of 14 feet. The Panama City beach has been closed. Half of the population of the area has left already. The winds could hit also Georgia and even the Carolinas. The governor of Florida says that it's time to go and it's time to take all the precautions because they believe that the consequences are going to be devastating. We get back to you now.
We thank Jorge Gestoso for that report. Nicaragua is still reeling from the heavy rainfall brought by Michael in recent days. 14 people were reported dead across Central America and damage was widespread.
Floods, fallen trees and semi-destroyed houses are what's left in the aftermath of heavy rainfall. In the Camilo Ortega neighborhood, Maria Auxiliadora lost her home and all her belongings.
Here, many neighborhoods of Nicaragua are affected. The whole country is like this, but President Daniel is helping not only me, but all the affected.
The government has begun an emergency response. In the Monteverde region, the City Hall of Managua continues to help people most in need, an initiative much appreciated by locals.
We are not at risk like before, because before we couldn't even fall asleep each time it rained. The first time, the rain even dragged big trees that we had. But with this help, we feel more safe. We can go to bed at peace. This has been a benefit for all.
In Managua, over 3,000 people were evacuated to temporary shelters.
The model that the government has, it has been tested whether it's an earthquake, flooding, fires, any type of natural disaster. It's a model that first of all puts our people as the main protagonist. A lot of training and risk disaster management, in how we deal with emergencies and with interinstitutional accompaniment.
In the capital, 24 houses were destroyed, 7 shelters are in operation. So far, more than 25,000 people have been affected and 4 were killed.
And while the economic cost of climate-related disasters has reached $2.25 trillion over the last 2 decades, according to the United Nations, that's a 150% increase. The UN has reported that climate change is increasing the risk of extreme natural disasters, such as floods and storms. Countries where the financial cost has been the highest are India, China, the United States, and Japan. These findings come just ahead of Category 4 Hurricane Michael that is expected to make landfall in Florida, U.S.
We have seen already that there is a very sharp increase in the number of climate-related events, which are actually creating 77% of the total direct economic losses caused by disasters. The report also emphasizes on the fact that the poorest of the poor are the most affected. And this happens even in developed nations.
We really need to have some disaster risk reduction and disaster risk mitigation, that is adaptation for the short term. For 5 to 10 year period, poor people in poor countries do not have 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Most of those children will be dead. This is what is going to happen. Either they will be dead because of the catastrophe itself, or they'll be dead because of the prevailing persistent effect of malnutrition that comes along with these catastrophes, with the droughts and the floods.
And amid concerns that climate change could see increased rainfall intensity comes news that heavy rains and flash floods have killed at least 9 people on the island of Mallorca in Spain. Within the span of a few hours late Tuesday night, rivers burst their banks, flooding streets and homes. Roads have also been destroyed, cars were swept away by the water, and people were left trapped in their homes. 6 people are still missing.
I want to show my solidarity and empathy to the families of the victims who have suffered an enormous loss. And I want to reassure the population that the Spanish government will put into action all the necessary resources so they can go back to their normal lives.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
Brazilian citizens casted their vote in general elections. Telesul was there to bring you all the most important and immediate information about this election process. You witnessed the latest development of this event on our website and social networks. Coverage Brazil Decides 2018, only on Telesul, the news source of Latin America and the Caribbean.
Welcome back. university students are marching throughout Colombia to protest the budget crisis. Private universities with the SENAS Workers Union and the National Indigenous Organization are protesting the financial situation. Several academic institutions have been forced to close, and according to Jennifer Pedreza, a representative of the National University, the institution's budget deficit exceeds $6 million. The FARC party has demanded that Colombia's Attorney General release former FARC commander Jesus Santrich from detention immediately. FARC Senator Victoria Sandino highlighted that the extradition to the United States of Santrich over drug trafficking charges was suspended. She said his rights have been violated, in particular his rights to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. Prosecutor Néstor Humberto Martínez has already admitted before for the Special Jurisdiction for Peace that he has no proof against Santrich.
Santrich is the only prisoner in Colombia who has been detained without complying with the norms of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. He was detained under an Interpol order that violated all legal regulations.
Delegates from all over Colombia and the international community are in Bogotá to participate in the Legislative and Popular Assembly of the Peoples. Participants rejected the neoliberal policies of Iván Duque, the murder of social leaders, as well as the other social and economic conflicts in the country.
With ancestral rituals, organizations from different sectors began the Legislative and Popular Assembly of the Peoples, with which they look forward to achieve unity among Colombians who reject the economic policies of President Iván Duque. They demand to speed up the enforcement of the peace agreement and the dialogues with ELN.
It is urgent for the Colombian people to organize against the neoliberal and paramilitary attacks of Iván Duque, who is just a puppet of Álvaro Uribe. This assembly is the chance for the people to unite and organize social mobilizations.
Communities reject the murder of social leaders, stigmatization and violation of basic rights, such as education, housing, and even life itself. All this committed by the government, who ignores the needs of the people.
Violation of human rights is a common thing due to the abandonment of the state, which allows racism against the Afro-descendants communities and persecution against social leaders.
Delegates from Choco, Putumayo, the Cauca Valley, Caqueta, Nariño, among other departments, and also international community attended the assembly. They talk about the need to defend human rights and peace for the region.
Fraternity among peoples is important. There can be military intervention supported by the US and imperialism.
Social organizations want to change this world because the current capitalist system and imperialism is merciless.
The Legislative and Popular Assembly of the Peoples will end with a national mobilization on October 12th to ask the government for solutions.
Workers' Party presidential candidate Fernando Haddad held a press conference for international media on Wednesday in Brazil. He spoke about the dangers far-right candidate Jair Bolsonaro represents for the country, particularly in economic matters.
We need a new pact, and this gives us a huge challenge because the whole of the Brazilian establishment is supporting the far-right alternative. Unlike what has happened in some European countries and the United States, in Brazil, the big financial interests are showing their preference for the far right.
Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ignacio Lemos, has more.
The presidential candidate for the Workers' Party, Fernando Haddad, has been talking to the international media at this hotel in Sao Paulo, where he was warned about another possible absence of Jair Bolsonaro from the coming TV debates, supposedly on advice from his doctors. Fernando Haddad said he was ready to go to any hospital or clinic and that he will debate very calmly so as not to put any stress on Bolsonaro. He said that the absence of Bolsonaro would be another blow to democracy, especially in a situation where the electorate is being informed by fake news on social media. Haddad also talked about the international situation, including the diplomatic tension between Brazil and Venezuela. He said Brazil needed to develop a different kind of diplomatic relationship with its neighbors. He said there needed to be collaboration with Venezuela and also with Argentina, and this was the best way of helping to promote solutions to the crisis in those countries. On Argentina, he said that in spite of ideological differences, collaboration could help to improve the economic situation there, and this would be good for Brazil too. Haddad also pointed to the dangers presented by U.S. interest in the region, with military bases and its interest in controlling Venezuela and also Brazil offshore oil reserves. Finally, Haddad emphasized his disagreements with the economic adjustments policies of President Michel Temer, which he said will be continued by Bolsonaro and his main economic advisor, Paulo Guedes. He said the voters had rejected such policies last Sunday, as seen in the very low votes for the candidates of the two governing parties, the MDB and the PSDB.
Opposition to the tax reform in Costa Rica continues, even though the Legislative Assembly has already approved the reform during their first debate.
1 month on, workers continue to strike across the country. They have said that the strike will only end when tax reform is completely repealed.
We need to see the reform to be completely revised. If there is any constitutional flaw in it, it can't get through the Assembly. If the reform passes during the second debate, we will take it to the streets.
Protesters consider it a win that the reform was only approved with 35 votes in favor, with 22 assembly members voting against it.
When we started this strike, only one lawmaker was supporting us. We ended up with over 22. That tells us our protests have reached the Legislative Assembly.
But some labor unions have already pulled out of the strike after the reform was approved during the first debate in the Assembly.
Healthcare unions are going back to work today. However, other sectors are still in strike. In the education sector, we keep fighting. Our movement remains strong.
Labor unions from over 15 public institutions have received affidavits saying their strike is illegal, including the Ministry of Public Education.
Throughout the years, most strikes in Costa Rica have been declared illegal. We are used to it, but people are strong enough to keep protesting despite that.
The country's judiciary has 30 days to approve the reform or deem it unconstitutional.
Cuba is celebrating the 150th anniversary of the start of its war for independence from Spanish colonial rule. Cuba's struggle for freedom began in 1868 when the island nation started a series of liberation wars which lasted more than 30 years. The first step came when the sugar mill owner Carlos Manuel de Céspedes freed his slaves, and together they started the uprising. In 1898, the country finally gained independence. The main celebration is taking place at La de Majagua, the sugar mill, where the revolt began. Our correspondent in Havana, Alien Fernandez, has more.
Cuba has started its 150th commemoration of the fight for independence with a special event in the province of Granma, specifically in La de Majagua, the place where the Cuban Carlos Manuel de Céspedes freed his slaves and the fight for independence began in 1868. In attendance was the first secretary of the Communist Party of Cuba, Raúl Castro, and the president, Miguel Díaz-Canel. In a speech, Díaz-Canel said that the revolution of 1959 was a continuation of the first uprising in 1868. During the ceremony, 21 artillery pieces were launched, and the leader of the Young Communist League insisted that they will continue to uphold the legacy of Fidel Castro and Carlos Manuel Céspedes.
And Barbados has the most powerful passport in the Caribbean, according to the 2018 Henley Passport Index. The island maintained first place in the region, placing 21st on the list. Barbados was followed by Bahamas, St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, and Trinidad and Tobago. First place overall went to Japan. The index is a ranking of all passports of the world, according to the number of countries their holders can travel to visa-free. Jamaica's government has called on the National Water Commission and the National Works Agency to collaborate in infrastructure development. Speaking at the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Conference, Prime Minister Andrew Holmes discouraged agencies from working in solos. He said when it comes to infrastructure projects, the main actors should work in tandem. Still in Jamaica, the country has signed a concession agreement with a Mexican company, which is the successful bidder for the public-private partnership deal for the Norman Manley International Airport. Prime Minister Andrew Holmes was in attendance and said the bidding for the airport project signified another successful partnership agreement. This follows the completion of the Kingston Container Terminal in 2016 and the North-South Highway in 2012. Holmes reaffirmed his government's commitment to enabling private sector investment. Barbados' ambassador to the United Nations says a lack of reliable data is hampering efforts to ensure the protection of children's rights. Elizabeth Thompson was speaking on behalf of CARICOM at the 11th meeting of the Social, Humanitarian and Cultural Committee on Tuesday.
UNICEF informs us that more than 650 million children live in 52 countries that are off track, or at least 2/3 of the child-related SDG indicators will not be met in those countries, for which data is available. And over 500 million children live in 64 countries that lack sufficient data for useful assessment of their status. To have sustained progress, reliable data is needed, including in the CARICOM region.
Haiti's Caribbean coastline near the northern city of Cayhaiten is being choked with tides of plastic waste. Locals have seen their coastline inundated with plastic pollution, from bags and bottles to plastic cutlery and packaging materials. With rubbish collection facilities in the impoverished country scarce, some locals are dumping their waste in the Caribbean Sea, only to see it washed up on shore later on. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. CCTV footage showing missing Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul has emerged. International news channel TRT World obtained the footage on Wednesday. It shows Khashoggi walking into the consulate on October 2nd, 2018, the day of his disappearance. Turkish newspaper Sabah has said authorities have identified a 15-member intelligence team said to be involved in the disappearance. At least 50 people have been killed when the bus they were traveling in overturned and its entire roof was ripped off in Kenya. According to officials, the bus was traveling from Nairobi to the western town of Kakamega. The vehicle was reportedly descending a steep hill when it hit a guardrail before plunging a few meters.
Of that accident, we have lost 50 lives. That is 31 men, 12 women, and 7 children. The bodies have been moved to Kericho County Hospital mortuary. We have some survivors who are taken to Moroni Hospital and Fort Tenan, and some at Kericho.
The official death toll from the earthquake and tsunami that hit Indonesia on Saturday has risen to 2,045. Rescue workers believe perhaps 5,000 victims are yet to be found. Over 82,000 people have been displaced because of the devastation. Most of the victims are from Palu, the worst affected city on Sulawesi Island. Authorities say Thursday is the deadline to stop the evacuation process.
The emergency response period will still continue, but the evacuation process will be stopped on Thursday, October 11, 2018. Basic needs services for evacuees like health services, logistic distribution, makeshift school, building of temporary shelter, and others will continue until the end of October 2018.
Myanmar has continued its crackdown on the media. The latest victims are 3 journalists at Myanmar's largest private newspaper. The trio has been remanded into custody after turning themselves in to police on Wednesday. They're facing accusations of causing fear or alarm. Advocates say press freedom in Myanmar has retreated under the administration of Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, who took power in 2016. A total of 38 journalists have faced charges under various laws during her administration. Hundreds have participated in a pride parade for the LGBT community in Kosovo. Waving rainbow flags, celebrants marched demanding freedom and equal rights. Under the main banner saying "In the name of freedom," demonstrators walked through Pristina's main street. They say they're walking for those who cannot join them. A 2015 study revealed that Kosovo was the most homophobic country in the Balkans. The LGBT community in Israel has called for the resignation of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. During an anti-government rally, protesters accused Netanyahu of breaking promises made to the community.
We, the LGBT community, came to protest today to make it clear for the Netanyahu homophobic government that we had heard last summer, that 100,000 people took to the street. It's not over. Every day that I, as gay, am discriminated, as long as transgender people are being attacked in the streets, as long as lesbian parenthood and marriage are not recognized, we will protest and chase Netanyahu.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and many other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And also join us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.
Brazilian citizens casted their vote in general elections. Telesur